So in week 2 of the MOOC, we're getting our participants to think about how they can encourage their students to collaborate with each other to make it really engaging and an interactive experience. Has anyone got any experience of using blogs or wikis? Tim, have you used blogs at all in your teaching?
Yes, well, we use blogs in effectively 2 variety of ways, or actually 3. The first is as a private journal. We encourage students to document their learning, and we even use this for assessment purposes, but then there is no interaction in it, so it's just effectively a notebook, if you want. The second purpose is for an in-group discussion, and sometimes the blog format works a little bit better than the discussion forums, because of the ordering of articles, and the articles themselves are a little bit more prominent than the first posting in a discussion forum, and the nature of commenting. It somehow has a different feel to it than discussion forums. And the third purpose, which at the moment I'm not using myself, but 2 colleagues of mine are, is public blogging. My colleague John Potter has this Internet Cultures module where students are required to create their own fully public blog, and they are encouraged to obviously engage with each other, but also to invite the public to have comments and so on. And that is working quite well, and also it helps students to consider target audiences and writing for a particular audience, which is a really good training for writing in general.
Sarah, do you have any experience using wikis with your students?
Yeah, so our students have access to a wiki called WikiVet, which is available to all veterinary students and people who work in veterinary fields. So students can view content, they can create content, which is actually quite a useful learning exercise for them. And ourselves as academics, we can review that content, make sure it's current, up to date. It means that the wiki is a really useful information source for students that they can rely upon to some extent for their studies and for their revision.
I think if you want to encourage collaboration, there is hardly any better tool than a wiki. I really love wikis as a tool, not as in Wikipedia or so, but as a collaboration tool. But it needs to provide the correct features, and that's unfortunately where most built-in tools on learning platforms such as Moodle fall down. They're quite technical and not really attractive to use. But I remember an example from the past at the UCL School of Pharmacy, who were using a wiki for students to put all the medication online, all the drugs and the side effects and so on. And as far as I've heard, they are still running this activity now. It must be in their 8th year or so. And I'm using it for similar purposes. And if your wiki tool has tagging functionalities, for example, then that is incredibly useful, because students can create a collection and create 1 wiki page per item that you want to build a database with. And then you can use the tagging feature in order to create a categorization. So you're developing a folksonomy that emerges and so on. So students can make connections and create hierarchies and test around and be corrected by other students. And I think that's just so powerful.
I know there's some experience of using wikis in dissertation modules for that purpose, so that students can understand the relative merits of different sort of research methodologies and thinking about how they can learn both the sort of content and learn its relationship to their own personal dissertation topic, which is obviously something that students have a great deal of interest in, but may not be related to their immediate peers. So actually to be able to have a conversation and a dialogue around their methodology is something that brings them together and enables that sort of supported peer learning environment, even when the topic and the content can be quite diverse.
Super. Well, one of the tools we've been using in this MOOC that our participants have been trying out is called Padlet. It's a virtual wall, and our participants can write virtual post-its and stick them up, and they can see each other's and they can comment. Has anyone used Padlet in their teaching? Tim?
Yes, I have used Padlet, and I think it's quite a nice, accessible tool, which is also quite visual. So it's really good for brainstorming and making quick collections of content. So if you want to share images, videos, articles, links to websites and so on, then it can't get any easier than Padlet. And again, there's one feature that is often overlooked, which is you can move your notes around on the screen, which again can be used for kind of a categorization exercise, because once you've made the collection, the initial collection of materials, you can then ask students to move those things that have some similarity closer together, and then you end up with bubbles with small clouds of various topics on the screen, which again can be quite useful. But you need to think a little bit on about how you frame such an activity.
And I think that what speaks to is the importance of the sort of assessment rubric, even if it's just formative, to think about how you utilise your tool in relation to the outcome you want to achieve and on behalf of your students. So, having a sort of quantitative understanding of something like Padlet is one way of doing it, but actually I think there's a qualitative judgment that needs to come into any form of assessment, and actually utilising these different tools, really think about how your assessment rubrics going to work in light of these different technologies that you have access to.
There's a lot of really cool stuff out there which we've been exploring in the MOOC, but absolutely it's about the planning and the appropriateness of these technologies. So we shouldn't be trying something out because it looks really cool. It's got to have a pedagogic purpose as well.
And I think there's no need to be particularly formulaic about which of these tools that you choose. Actually, sometimes our students are very capable of using those kind of shared collaborative spaces on their own. So our students do a lot of group work, and they're very good at using shared documents like Google Docs or other types of shared document on a cloud storage drive. They collaborate in those ways with each other just as they're going about their normal day-to-day study. So.
Yeah, and in terms of collaboration, I am using a variety of tools, but I'm generally shying away from tools that ask users to log in or create a new set of user login data, because I think that interrupts the flow somewhat. Now, that restricts me quite a lot on the choice of tools, but I think if you put additional hurdles on using a new tools, then it makes it very difficult, and students might have a legitimate reason not to create a new account on a particular platform, because they fear that that they are not in control of their data and so on. And these are legitimate fears. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I just some of our students who are based in certain parts of the world don't have access to Google, for example. And indeed some people who might like to have watched this MOOC won't have access to it because they'll live in certain parts of the world where they won't have access. And there are legitimate concerns beyond any sort of conspiracy theories, but they are legitimate.
Talking about group work, which Sarah mentions, and use of collaborative tools, Anne, have you got some experience from your old practice on students collaborating, working in groups, and what tools did you use for that?
Yes, we just used very simple methods, just the discussion forums within Moodle. They've worked really well because you don't have to all be online at the same time, and we have students all over the world. And they have time to think about what they're going to write down and such. And so, for instance, one of our group exercises, we usually have about sort of 6 or 7 students in a group. It's great because they actually get the chance to get to know each other, and often they feel quite isolated, so that's great for that. And they would usually have a tutor that's sort of watching their group, and they'd be given a particular problem to, for instance, we look at, I work in epidemiology, and they get given a research question that might be going ahead, and they need to think about they need to be like a virtual ethics committee and consider that, and consider what might be wrong about it, or what might be right about it, what might be a good thing, and then sort of suggest modifications to the proposal that might be made. And they do that as a group. And it's great because it's not only teaching them about the content and thinking about the ethics, it's actually got this secondary aim of working together as a group, learning that from different cultures, they're from different time zones, different backgrounds, learning being able to be clear and concise in what they write down. So it has sort of two advantages there, and they work very well.
Any other examples of using forums in teaching? Simon?
Yeah, I mean, we use forums, pretty extensively in the online courses that I've been responsible for. And partly, again, that's a function of the discipline about studying diplomacy. It's about communication, and indeed, a written form of communication in many instances. But there is also, the way we use our forums really puts an emphasis on the student's reflection and putting utilising the fact that it's asynchronous and not synchronous, and seeing that as a positive advantage to the student's learning. So typically, if we're based here in the UK, in Northern Europe, we can use the timeline here, and then students on continental Europe, students further around the world in the East Coast, across the United States, and indeed North America and South America, through the Pacific, across the Asia Major and Minor, and back around again. And in 24 hours, I've got a dialogue of 15 students that's a very rich, reflective, and thought-out conversation. And one of the things that we utilise to make that sure that it's a worthwhile conversation and not just, as it were, the sort of ramblings of individuals, is to frame that conversation, to have a specific question that one wants to get out of that discussion forum, to put a temporal dimension to it, so there's a timeline to it, to provide a definite dialogue so that the student isn't just offering their thoughts on a subject but responding to other students' thoughts on the subject, and also to have the support of an associate tutor who is trained to facilitate that conversation. And all of those things together, you have a very rich educational experience for all of the participants. It's not prejudicing anyone who can't be online at a specific time. It's not prejudicing anyone who has access to some material but not others. It's all about sharing that dialogue.
The asynchronicity is really powerful, particularly with the distance learning. Any other examples of using discussion forums?
Yeah, well, same here. We use discussion forums a lot, and they are really a tried and tested tool and simple to use, and it's built in and works quite well. And I fully agree with Simon's points that you need to structure your activities in the way Simon has laid out. I would probably add some thoughts about group size to the mix, because when you have a big course with probably even student numbers in triple figures, then one single forum might make things very difficult, and especially if students are not used to working in such cohorts, then a single forum with 150 students post at the same time can very quickly become overwhelming, and those students who were used to following everything and trying to read every little post will soon learn that they need to get different strategies to cope with all the content. So in that way, I tend to prefer to break people into groups as well, like the example you've mentioned, and that just helps to manage the sheer amount that can go on.
I mean, I think that's a very good point. So the research that both observed and done now on discussion forums needs sort of a minimum guide of 6 individuals and a maximum of 15. Gives the right window of conversation, the variety of individuals, without it becoming overwhelming, as you suggest, Tim, but actually making it a manageable conversation.
As it would be in real life, I guess. Great. The last question in this area is about web conferencing. So there are lots of different platforms available to enable students who are disparate in different countries to come together virtually and experience some teaching and learning. Anne, have you got some experiences of using web conferencing software?
Yes, we've been using it for a few years now. We use Collaborate, and we use it in several different ways. We use it both in an academic sense, so particularly around exam revision time, we use it for exam preparation, get students all together, and then there will be a structured session going through that. And they're usually our most highly attended sessions as well. And what's great about it is that it can be recorded, because we do have this problem with time zones. We try to do them at 2 different times of the day to catch as many as possible, but they are recorded for those students who can't make it. And they really value that. They really value the opportunity of just having somebody there directly that they can actually talk to and immediately get an answer and immediately sort of present their question to. And we also use them in a sort of more of a generic way, so say like an induction when we've got all our new students joining. We run several sessions, and then we get existing students in to give their advice to the new students coming in. So that's just a sort of almost a socialising purpose there in that way.
really powerful for distance learners who can feel that they're part of a learning community. Tim, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, not just powerful for establishing social presence again for distance learners, that's a prime purpose for web conferencing, but also you can be quite creative in this environment. The default position is perhaps to run lectures, online lectures, where you have one person presenting something, hopefully with good visuals and using the pointers and everything properly. And I definitely do not want to condemn using web conferencing in this format, because distance education students normally don't have any experience of sitting in a lecture. And there's nothing wrong with lectures if they are designed quite well. And they can be made engaging. And in a web conferencing environment, learners usually also have the function to feedback and leave comments, ask questions. So there can be a discussion on the side while the lecture is ongoing, which you can't really have in a face-to-face environment, interestingly, unless students pass on written notes to each other under their desks, which they probably do, maybe not topic related. But then we use web conferencing mainly well, not mainly, but also for activities that empower students, where students bring the content forward, where students are driving the sessions. And that, for example, can be student presentations, individual presentations, which need quite a bit of resource. If you want to give every individual student the opportunity to present in a web conference, and you have a class with 60 people, then you need to run quite a number of sessions. But then one activity that I personally like very much is a debate, where you put students in two camps and ask them to prepare in a web conference or on discussion forums in those groups, in hidden groups. So every group prepares in secret with each other, asynchronously, asynchronously, however they want. And then on a particular day, we get them together in a web conference and have a formal debate with multiple rounds, pro-argument, contra-arguments, and a vote at the end. And the last time we did this, the students were so engaged during the online debate, they were frantically texting each other on the forums and so on to adjust their arguments. And that really shows that actually students can be quite passionate about some activities.
That's brilliant. Simon, you're not using web conferencing software yet for your distance learning students, but have you thought about it?
We've certainly thought about it. We've going through a number of development phases, so I think actually it is something we'd like to be able to bring on board. I'm wary in terms of some of the subject matter, and actually some of our students are wary of speaking even in web conferencing if it's recorded, by virtue of where those recordings may be stored and who may be seeing them. We're fortunate sitting in the United Kingdom that whatever concerns we have about our individual sort of information security, we're broadly secure in that, but actually people in other parts of the world where that information is stored and shared, some students that we have are very reluctant to do that. And it speaks to the value in my subject of secret diplomacy. Actually, there's a value to having a conversation which is offline. It is a conversation that is part of something else that's going on. That doesn't mean it can't be brought into a more open or an online environment, but there is a sort of necessary thought process about those kind of issues.
Very good.
I just want to mention one other use case. We use web conferencing systems as a kind of poor people lecture recording system. So those rooms that are not equipped with a lecture recording system, you can just fire up a web conference and record that. That's actually quite easy to do. And that works reasonably well. And we are now in our second year of doing what we call hybrid sessions, where we have face-to-face students and online students together at the same time. So we are running a face-to-face session in the classroom, but have a web conference running where online students are tuning in at the same time. And then in group work phases, the face-to-face students are pretty easy to organize, but then the online students can work in groups as well at the same time and then feedback to the whole class. Now, this is quite a challenging situation, and I'm writing up a paper about that. about the experience. And the most frequent thing that occurs is that the tutors in the classroom tend to forget that there are online people at the same time. So there's a bit of training required on behalf of the tutor to make the tutors aware that the audience is not just those people you see, but there are also others out there. And obviously one method to mitigate is to have a second person looking after the web conference. But we are experimenting with this, and it's actually quite an interesting experiment. And because it can ease pressure on the estate, which for UCL is a big thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some experience of that when working in a previous institution of utilising sort of bilateral partnership with a colleague in the United States. And although her course was both on a slightly different subject about Latin American diplomacy and at a different level, there were points of contact with the class that I was teaching about US foreign policy, and to bring them together in a synchronous fashion on occasion and to have them work asynchronously in groups together with effectively a mix of students from where I was and students from Arizona, as it was, together actually made a very rich environment. It's not something I've been able to replicate subsequently, but it is something that can work well.